Hello everybody and welcome back to Weeknight Hero. As always, I'm your GM, Evan. It's been a long time coming. Following the character creation series, I've had dozens of comments asking to make a live version of creating a character so you can see in real time the kinds of decisions and ideas that I have when making characters. But context is everything. I would need to make a character that most of my audience has some level of understanding so they can check my work. I can think of no better character to use as an example than Boruto's dad, Naruto Uzumaki. How popular is Naruto? My coworker's son, who was born in 2013, knows who Naruto is. He's been part of one of the most popular manga series since at least the start of the 2000s. So I figured I'd start there. So the first place I start is always the concept. Thankfully, that's taken care of for me. So I then move on to the power level. So since Mutants and Masterminds has varying power levels for their campaigns, and there have been many iterations of Naruto with differing degrees of skill, I decided I should narrow it down to one area so we all understand what we're talking about. My favorite era of Naruto is during Pain's invasion, before he gained numerous complicated powers in quick succession that are so difficult to stat out and follow. So I put this era of Naruto at power level 11. With the anime conversion rules we discussed in the previous video, this would give us 220 power points, plenty to spend on with the very costly multiple shadow clone jutsu power. The next step is to organize the traits that make up Naruto's character so we can decide what we want to emphasize. The first thing I want to emphasize is he has peak level and superhuman levels of fitness. So his physical attributes are something that I would definitely put an emphasis on, and I would put less of an emphasis on his mental attributes. Secondly, he has fewer skills outside of the physical ones. Of course, acrobatics is huge, athletics is going to be huge, stealth is going to be huge because he's a ninja. But what's his skill with technology? Limited. What's his skill with treatment? Also limited. Next, it would not be Naruto without a huge emphasis on powers and advantages. Mostly in the shadow clone techniques, but he has Rasengan and Rasen Shuriken. And he also has the summoning technique. So let's start there. The first place we start off in is abilities. So typically, you'd have a reference book with you, so you can pull up the Game Master's Guide if you don't know this off the top of your head. But I'm going to go just off of memory and start sorting out his abilities. So strength, obviously, is higher than normal. It's going to be roughly peak human physical strength. Somebody like Choji, somebody like Guy would have superhuman strength. So roughly, I would say this puts him in like power level 6. I think it's a strong enough area that he can do plenty of damage. And with the right advantages, he can do far more than that with like power attack. Nextly, I would do stamina. So stamina and strength, I like to put them very comparable because that's just a quirk that I have. But a lot of the time, strength and stamina will kind of go hand in hand with the character. And I like to keep them roughly equal, so you're determining a general physical durability. So stamina, I'm going to put it at 6, which thankfully with the defensive roll powers that we're going to add on to it later, it's going to keep him within the power level scaling for his toughness save, so he is reasonably durable. Next, we look at his agility, and I think it's reasonable again to put him at peak human fitness level. So we're going to go for 6, though it's very reasonable to put his agility at 7 or 8, just given the setting that he's going to be in. I chose 6, but it's entirely possible to see him at 8, 10s, 11s, 12s. Next is dexterity. He's not particularly well known for the accuracy of his ranged attacks, though he does have plenty of training in it, which is why I'm going to put it at 4. Now, on the next row, you're seeing fighting. Of course, it also needs to be high because it's a combat-focused series, and a campaign focused on Naruto would be combat-focused. So I would reasonably put him at 6. Why is that? Because I mentioned in the abilities video that the difference between abilities and skills and advantages can be kind of granular, but I like to look at it this way. If he is a master of a particular fighting style, I think it's reasonable to have him be about 4, 5, or 6. If he practices multiple types of taijutsu, if he practices multiple swordsmanship and spearmanship along with 3 different types of martial arts like Kakashi can, it's very reasonable for it to be much higher. But I'm just going to go ahead and put it at 6 because he's a master of his self-taught kind of brawler style. Naturally, intellect is 0 because while Naruto may be smart, he might be able to problem solve very well, and he has plenty of ingenuity. Intellect is focused on learned or trained skills, which Naruto does not have any. Now, when we come to awareness, I'm going to put it at 3. He's very poor at handling deception, very poor at handling tricks and genjutsu, so it's exactly fine where it is. And presence, I would say, despite his ability with Tak no Jutsu, it's far more of like the focus is on his ability to tell the truth and the ability to form lasting friendships with people. That's far more of the persuasion skill. Presence would be including things like intimidation and deception and any other kind of like disguise or interpersonal skills, which Naruto lacks in a lot of ways. He's very much a like my way to the highway, or I'm going to beat you into friendship. That doesn't really reflect the presence skill, so it's 0. Next, we move into his active and passive saves. So for the saves, the toughness save is going to be handled both by his stamina and by the defensive roll advantages that we're going to give him later on in the advantages section. So toughness is clear. Next, we're going to move on to fortitude save, and thanks to the powers of the nine-tailed fox, he is reasonably tough and able to handle external damage, sicknesses, fire, drowning, anything like that. I'm going to bolster this with 6 points to make it 12, putting him just over the average power level or the average save level for the power level, which is 11. So he's good there. And then will save, I'm going to add 5 points to take it up from like a terrible will save, which 3 would be perfect for a pre-time skip Naruto. But post-time skip, he has a little more training with deceit and genjutsu and mental attacks. So now it's below the power level, but it's reasonable. Like he's proficient at handling genjutsu, but he's not great at it. Finally, for his active saves, we're going to add 6 points to dodge and parry to bring them up to 12, which is just above the power level, but it also makes it so that he's maxed out in conjunction with his toughness save. So not only is he very agile and able to avoid many attacks, he is also able to take many attacks, which I think is an important characteristic of a protagonist and main character. Now, as we move into his skills, we had already mentioned that a lot of the physical skills are what we're going to be focusing on here, because Naruto does not excel at academics or strategic thinking. He's far more of an intuition-based character. So we're going to bolster up his acrobatics with 3 points to make it a rank 12 in acrobatics, also in athletics because I like symmetry, which represents that he is easily superhuman. He is at the level of an Olympic athlete, and he's able to do these twists and flips and tricks that an average person could not possibly do. You're going to add a little bit to the close combat skills that he's going to have, so that whether he's attacking with his fists, whether he's attacking with Rasengan, he is able to accurately deal damage equal to the power level. Now, when we look at insight, he has some level of understanding and some level of empathizing with characters. So we're going to give it a couple of points, 3, to bolster him up to a +9 bonus in insight, which makes him he's well trained in reading people's emotions a little bit. It doesn't mean that he's not prone to failure or that he might lose out sometimes, but I think it's proficient. Nextly, you're adding a couple power points to persuasion, perception, and stealth, so 4, 3, and 3, so that he has some skill in persuasion, because it mostly works at the end, but it's not like he's a diplomat. If he were really good at persuasion, you wouldn't have to fight people to begin with. And same thing with perception. As a ninja, he's rather proficient at it, so that he can pick up on stealth attacks, but he's not really well versed in picking up the details on people, so that's why it has symmetry with insight. Stealth, the 3 points that you add to stealth, brings him up to being like a superhuman level in stealth. He's a ninja, so it makes sense. Though it's not used very often, he does have the ability to infiltrate environments and deceive people, so it's appropriate. And finally, as a ranged combat, really that's only adding to Shuriken and Rasen Shuriken, but it adds just another proficient bonus, which is symmetrical with close combat, which just shows that he's both accurate and capable of doing quite a bit of damage. Next, when it comes to his advantages, I took a look at the advantage packages that would really make sense for him, and you have some from Agile Fighter, you have some from a Power Fighter, and then you have some that are really team-based, and then also just main character powers. So firstly, you're going to go in with equipment to give him shurikens, ropes, anything like that, your standard ninja toolkit. Then you're going to take from an agile fighter something like defensive roll, which we had mentioned earlier, just adds his durability. Evasion, move by action, and take down, so that it represents a ninja's abilities to fight quickly and get around a battlefield very easily. And then you're also adding that with some of the key ones from Power Fighter. So improved grab, improved hold, fast grab, because he really does rely on his strength a lot of the times. And also his self-taught fighting style relies heavily on his clones grabbing people, because he has no fear. If the clone gets hurt, it just disappears. So he's able to do this with impunity and hold down opponents, so he can use his power attack to really do damage. And finally, you see his teamwork advantages. Obviously, if he's using clones, he's creating multiple characters with the summon power, which means that they are able to do team attacks. So why not improve his team attacks with teamwork, improved team attack, variable team attack? And so now you're just adding more to the amount of damage that he can do, because his character is teamwork focused. Now, finally, as we get to powers, this might be probably the largest roadblock that you're going to run into, because the powers can be somewhat complicated. Thankfully, we're only narrowing it down to a small list of them. So what I like to do when you're coming up with powers is firstly determine the power's function. Why do you do this? Because it's very easy to get overly complicated with powers in Mutants and Masterminds. And so you're trying to find the base function of what your power does so that it's easiest to explain. The way I've had it explained is the easiest way to look at it is if you have a wide-ranging and like strongly utilitarian power like create. Create is something that you use to create obstacles in your environment. But if your ability is to control the earth, you can be creating walls, you can be creating bridges, you can be altering the environment in many kinds of ways, and you can also just be dropping rocks on people. How does that fit in with your earth power and your create power? Well, the create power can do some of that on its own. It's better to have them as singular powers. So if you're creating bridges in walls and earth, what are you doing? If you're creating an earth wall to protect yourself from an attack, perhaps you should use it as a sustained impervious protection or a deflect power rather than a create wall power. So if you do something to create a wall, a character is able to circumvent it using a movement power. So you shouldn't be using create in this instance. You should be using protection. And similarly, if you're using your create power in order to throw a rock at somebody, you can, of course, move things with create. However, you should use it as a damage power instead, particularly if you might be doing it in like a close range, or if you're creating an earth fist, you're hitting somebody. You're not creating an earth fist. You're just creating something that's going to do more damage to somebody. So you use it as a close range damage power, and with it you can add your strength to it, so it would be even stronger than if you just use create. So these are the kinds things you think about. You should be able to sum your power up in one sentence, and you should be able to determine its function based on that one sentence. So when we're talking about the powers, I would go first with the multiple shadow clone jutsu. So I would write that you summon 3 or 4 clones to help me use team attacks. Makes sense. And if you're using a reference book like Power Profiles or the Game Master's Guide or the rulebook, it becomes very clear that you're using a summon power because you are summoning allies to help you fight. So this would be like a horde controllable heroic summon. So you're creating characters that you are controlling on the battlefield. You should limit it to 3 or 4 clones, mostly because that's the maximum benefit you're going to be getting off of team attacks. And also, controlling 3 or 4 characters in a round becomes entirely and needlessly complicated. So don't go that far. However, for your mass multiple shadow clone jutsu, you're summoning dozens or hundreds of clones, but what are you doing it for? Are you doing it so that you're creating hundreds or thousands of equally strong characters? Because that's what the multiple shadow clone jutsu is for. No, you should be using them as minions and using them as a distraction, because now your opponent has to get through all of them in order to get to you, which is how Naruto uses his power. So more so than anything, you're using a multiple minion horde summon power. However, you're not making them heroic, so they just come out as minions, and you don't even particularly need to control them. So I wouldn't use controllable, and so mostly they're just to stand around and be a distraction. Now, here's where we get into the difficulty. Should all of these powers be an array? No, they should not, because each of the powers can be used simultaneously. That's the key thing that defines an array. To turn on one of the powers, you have to turn off all the other ones. However, I am coming up with a slight caveat just to save power points, where using the multiple shadow clone jutsu and the summon toads jutsu, the summoning jutsu, I'm going to have those be an array because it saves time. And also, you don't often see Naruto using multiple shadow clones and summons all together. So we're going to go ahead and put them there so that you're giving a different style of combat. I'm a big proponent of phases in a fight, or stances, or certain loadouts for certain characters. So if you're summoning a toad, you're summoning another character in the exact same way that you would be using the multiple shadow clone jutsu. So if you're summoning 3 or 4 clones, why do you also need to put a toad on top of it? Or why do you need to drop a toad on somebody with the food cart destroyer technique? So this is all to say, keep all the summons in one area, and then he determines what he needs for the encounter. Does he need more clones to do team attacks? Or does he need the unique abilities of the toads in order to help him? Now, after that, this becomes incredibly easy, because Rasengan and Rasen Shuriken are very simple powers. We had already discussed it in a short, but the Rasengan is a secondary effect damage incurable damage attack. So it's being used in close quarters, and you're just going to hit somebody with a really powerful attack that's really going to knock them out. Same thing with Rasen Shuriken. You're throwing a shuriken to do damage. It explodes on contact and does more damage afterwards. So secondary effect, which is damage. Incurable, but it's going to be a ranged area damage attack, which is all to say you're going to throw it, it's going to make a big explosion on contact and do more damage to them afterwards. So the big ball Rasengan is very similar, only now you're making it a large area attack, so characters that are particularly durable and not very agile are going to take the full damage of that attack. So with these ideas clearly in mind, you can now build around the character, and with that, we're done. And that's honestly all you really need to do. Of course, you got to narrow down what his equipment is and what his complications are, but most of the time, people can figure that out on their own. But look how easy this was. We were able to put it together an entire character and spend roughly all of his 220 power points. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping to make sure that they all add up correctly. But for the most part, it's just that easy. Once you know the system, it becomes very easy to take care of everything that you're doing. But once you figure out some of the shortcuts that you do for making characters, like mine, which the biggest one is symmetry, the biggest one are the advantage packs, or figuring out the functions to a power, you'll be surprised at the types of characters you can create very easily. Thank you so much for waiting on this one, and thank you so much for waiting patiently. It's a bit different from the other videos that I do, and the next one's going to be exactly the same. The next one's going to be a combat encounter using this character that we created. And since I created this character to fight Pain from Pain's Invasion, I think there would be a perfect example of how firstly, simple combat can work in Naruto, and then also advanced combat can work with Mutants and Masterminds by first having a simple encounter and then a more difficult encounter with multiple characters and multiple shadow clones involved, so that we can really see the benefits of working with a system like this. But that about wraps it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next videos coming soon.